What happens when Hollywood's most charismatic leading man, beloved for his authenticity and charm, steps onto the set of daytime TV's most outspoken talk show, where no opinion goes unchallenged? Pedro Pascal thought he was joining The View for a routine promotional appearance to hype his role as Reed Richards in the highly anticipated Fantastic Four, a Marvel blockbuster already generating Oscar buzz. But what unfolded was a fiery clash that left the audience reeling, producers scrambling, and social media exploding with reactions that would dominate the cultural conversation for weeks. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. It was a raw, unfiltered battle that exposed personal grudges, clashing ideologies, and the fragile line between professional courtesy and public humiliation. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story doesn't just escalate, it ignites, with every moment more intense than the last, and you won't believe where it leads. Pedro Pascal strode onto the View set, his signature charisma radiating like a beacon, flashing that warm, disarming smile that had won over millions in The Mandalorian, The Last of Us, and now Fantastic Four. The studio audience erupted in applause, their cheers filling the brightly lit New York soundstage, where the iconic circular table was flanked by vibrant backdrops and a massive screen, showcasing clips of Pedro's latest superhero role. The energy was electric, almost celebratory, with fans holding signs proclaiming, "We love Reed Richards," and "Pedro for President." But beneath the festive atmosphere, there was a subtle tension. A glint in Joy Behar's eyes that hinted at something brewing. A spark of confrontation that suggested this wouldn't be the friendly chat Pedro's team had promised. He'd faced countless interviews, from intense press junkets to playful banter on late-night shows. But something about Joy's posture, her arms crossed, her smile a touch too sharp, put him on edge, like a seasoned actor sensing a scene about to veer off script. Joy kicked things off with her trademark New Brooklyn wit, welcoming the audience back with a sly grin, introducing Pedro as the man who's saving the Marvel Universe one charming smile at a time, her voice dripping with her usual mix of humor and edge. The crowd laughed, but her tone shifted as she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Pedro's, mentioning she'd been looking forward to this conversation for weeks, her words carrying a weight that made the audience lean in, sensing something big was coming. Pedro settled into his seat, exuding his laid-back confidence, his dark eyes twinkling as he thanked Joy and the co-hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Ain, and Sunny Hostin, for having him, complimenting the show's bold energy, and joking that he felt like he was stepping into a lion's den with all these powerhouse women. The audience chuckled, but Joy wasn't here for pleasantries, her smile tightening as she dove straight into the deep end, referencing a recent podcast interview where Pedro had commented on celebrities using their platforms to push personal agendas, suggesting some talk show hosts should focus on fostering dialogue rather than preaching. The mood shifted, the studio growing quieter as Joy pressed him, pulling out a quote with theatrical precision, her voice a mix of curiosity and challenge, asking if he really believed hosts like her were out of touch with everyday Americans, her words landing like a spark on dry tinder. Pedro's smile faltered for a split second, but he kept his composure, his eyes meeting Joy's as he clarified that his comments were about authenticity, not aimed at anyone specific, emphasizing that he valued storytelling that connected people over lectures that divided them. He spoke with a measured tone, his hands gesturing expressively, explaining that his perspective came from respect for audiences who deserved entertainment that uplifted rather than alienated, especially with a film like Fantastic Four, which he described as a story about unity and resilience. Joy, however, wasn't letting it slide, her tone sharpening as she challenged his credentials to speak for regular people, pointing out his Hollywood success, his red carpet lifestyle, and his role as a superhero genius in Fantastic Four, questioning whether he was just leaning into a carefully crafted everyman persona to sell tickets. The studio grew silent, the tension palpable, with audience members exchanging nervous glances, realizing this wasn't the light-hearted segment they'd expected. Pedro pushed back, his voice steady but tinged with frustration, explaining that his upbringing in San Antonio, raised by Chilean immigrant parents who worked tirelessly to provide for their family, gave him a grounded perspective, unlike some hosts who, in his view, turned serious issues into punchlines for applause. He mentioned his mother's sacrifices, her long hours as a psychologist, and his father's hustle to build a life in a new country, stories that grounded his belief that entertainers should respect their audience's struggles, not exploit them for clout. Joy's eyes narrowed, her smile vanishing as she leaned forward, her voice laced with sarcasm as she accused him of hypocrisy, suggesting his humble roots were just a convenient narrative to bolster his brand, a story he trotted out to seem relatable while living a life of private jets and Marvel paychecks. The audience gasped softly, sensing the line she was crossing, as Pedro's jaw clenched, his charm giving way to a steely resolve. He countered, his voice firm but controlled, pointing out that Joy's own career, her decades in the spotlight, her New York penthouse, hardly made her the voice of the working class she claimed to champion, a jab that drew a few murmurs from the crowd. He accused the View of often trivializing real-world struggles, turning complex issues like economic hardship or political divides into soundbites for laughs, a tactic he said alienated viewers who didn't share the panel's worldview. The studio was quiet now, the air thick with anticipation, as Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Pedro and Joy, while Sarah and Sonny exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to diffuse the mounting tension. Joy waved off any attempts to redirect, her voice sharp as she doubled down, accusing Pedro of dodging accountability for his elitist comments and questioning his right to critique her, when he'd built a career on playing fictional heroes like Reed Richards, who solved problems with science and superpowers, not real-world grit. The confrontation escalated, with Joy leaning into her role as the provocateur, her voice rising as she defended the View's mission, claiming it gave voice to everyday Americans through honest, if sometimes heated, discussions. Pedro didn't back down, his frustration bubbling up, his voice cutting through her words as he pointed out specific moments from the show where Joy had mocked opposing viewpoints, dismissing them as ignorant or backwards, to score points with the audience. He challenged her to have a real conversation about issues, not just sling insults to rile up the crowd, his words striking a chord with some audience members who nodded in quiet support. Joy's face flushed, her hands gripping her notes as she shot back, claiming she spoke for her viewers, amplifying their concerns, and that Pedro's criticism was an attack on her integrity as a host and a comedian. The studio was a pressure cooker now, with producers in the control room whispering frantically, their faces pale as they realized this live TV segment was spiraling into uncharted territory, with no clear way to pull it back. The studio of The View was a cauldron of tension, the air crackling with the raw energy of a confrontation that had transformed a routine promotional segment into a live television spectacle no one could tear their eyes away from. Pedro Pascal stood at the edge of the iconic circular table, his dark eyes burning with a mix of frustration and steely resolve, his earlier charm now a distant memory as he faced Joy Behar, whose sharp Brooklyn wit had turned venomous, her face flushed with defiance. The audience sat frozen, their initial cheers replaced by a stunned silence, as the clash between Hollywood's most beloved leading man and daytime TV's most outspoken host escalated into a battle of principles and egos. The co-hosts Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Ain, and Sonny Hostin exchanged uneasy glances, their attempts to steer the conversation back to Pedro's role as Reed Richards in Fantastic Four ignored. As Joy pressed forward, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. Producers in the control room scrambled, their headsets buzzing with frantic whispers, as they grappled with how to contain a situation spiraling out of control on live TV, a meltdown that threatened to redefine both Pedro's and Joy's public personas. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. because this showdown is about to reach a boiling point, and the next few minutes will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about these two titans. Joy Behar leaned forward, her hands gripping the table, her voice rising with a mix of indignation and sarcasm as she doubled down on her attack, accusing Pedro of playing the victim, claiming he couldn't handle being called out for his high and mighty podcast comments about talk show hosts preaching instead of fostering dialogue. She waved a hand dismissively, her eyes gleaming with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, suggesting that Pedro's charm, his carefully crafted image as the relatable everyman, was just a Hollywood facade to mask his privilege and sell Fantastic Four tickets. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others clutching their seats, as the segment veered further into a raw, personal slugfest, far from the lighthearted banter they'd tuned in for. Pedro's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides, but he kept his voice steady, his Chilean accent growing more pronounced as he responded, accusing Joy of twisting his words to paint him as the villain, a tactic he said was all too common on The View, where disagreement was often weaponized for applause rather than understanding. He pointed out that he'd come to promote a film about unity and human connection, only to be ambushed with accusations designed to humiliate him in front of millions, a move he called not just unfair but deliberately cruel, his words striking a chord with some audience members who nodded in quiet support. Joy's smile turned sharp, almost predatory, as she leaned back, her voice dripping with mockery as she challenged Pedro's authenticity, questioning how someone who'd starred in blockbuster franchises, rubbing shoulders with Marvel elites, could claim to understand the struggles of everyday Americans. She brought up his recent red carpet appearances, his designer suits, his A-list friendships, painting a picture of a man who'd left his San Antonio roots far behind in pursuit of fame, her words cutting deeper than the audience expected. Pedro's eyes narrowed, his composure tested but intact, his voice dropping to a low, controlled timbre that carried the weight of his frustration, countering that Joy's own success, her decades in the spotlight, her New York penthouse, hardly made her the voice of the working class she claimed to represent, a pointed jab that drew murmurs from the crowd. He spoke passionately about his upbringing, his parents' sacrifices as Chilean immigrants navigating a new country, his mother's long hours as a psychologist, his father's relentless hustle to provide stability, stories he rarely shared but felt compelled to defend now, his voice thick with emotion as he described watching his family overcome systemic barriers, a perspective that grounded his belief that entertainers should respect their audience's struggles, not exploit them for clout. The studio was a pressure cooker now, the tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls as Joy fired back, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and defensiveness, claiming The View was a platform for truth, a space where she and her co-hosts tackled real issues, from economic hardship to social justice, with honesty and humor. She accused Pedro of being ungrateful for the platform she'd given him, suggesting he was biting the hand that fed him by daring to critique her on her own turf, her words laced with a bitterness that surprised even her co-hosts, who shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the two. Pedro shook his head, his frustration boiling over, his voice rising just enough to command the room as he pointed out that gratitude didn't mean sitting quietly while being ambushed, that he'd come prepared to talk about Fantastic Four, a story of teamwork and sacrifice, not to be dragged into a personal vendetta. He challenged Joy to name a single episode where she'd had a genuine, open dialogue with someone who disagreed with her, a question that hung unanswered as Joy's face flushed deeper, her hands shaking slightly as she shuffled her notes, searching for a comeback that didn't come. The confrontation took a darker turn when Joy, in a moment of reckless bravado, brought up Pedro's early days in Hollywood, a time when he struggled with bit parts in TV shows, scraping by in New York and Los Angeles, couchsurfing, and facing rejection before his big break. She suggested, with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes, that he'd sold out his roots for fame, trading authenticity for the glitz of Marvel stardom. A low blow that drew audible gasps from the audience and a tense silence from Whoopi, Sarah, and Sunny, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Pedro's face hardened, his eyes darkening with a mix of anger and disbelief. As he leaned forward, his voice low and cutting, accusing Joy of weaponizing his past to undermine his credibility. A tactic, he said, was not just dishonest, but beneath someone of her experience and influence. He spoke with raw honesty about those early years, describing nights spent doubting himself, auditions that led nowhere, the constant pressure to prove himself in an industry that often overlooked outsiders like him. Stories that resonated with many in the audience, who clapped softly, their support emboldening him further. He turned the tables, questioning Joy's own journey, pointing out that her rise from stand-up comedy to The View came with its own compromises, asking if she'd ever forgotten the Brooklyn girl she claimed to be when she was signing book deals or hobnobbing with elites. A jab that hit its mark, drawing a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. The audience was riveted, their silence broken only by the occasional murmur or gasp. As the clash reached new heights, each exchange more personal, more cutting than the last. Joy stood up from her chair, her voice shrill as she accused Pedro of disrespecting her audience, her show, and her legacy as a voice for progressive causes, claiming he was trying to paint himself as a victim while attacking her authenticity. Pedro stood his ground, his posture unwavering, his voice steady but laced with a quiet fury as he countered that respect was earned, not demanded, and that Joy had lost as the moment she chose to ambush him instead of engaging in good faith, a statement that drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd. He spoke directly to the audience, his eyes sweeping the room, urging them to see through the theatrics, to recognize who was trying to have an honest conversation and who was chasing drama for ratings, his words striking a chord with many who clapped louder now, their support palpable. Joy's eyes flashed with fury, her hands trembling as she shot back, claiming she was standing up for her viewers, giving them the truth about celebrities who thought they were above scrutiny. But Pedro cut her off, his voice rising with a controlled intensity that silenced the room, accusing her of turning discourse into a circus, where disagreement was weaponized for entertainment rather than understanding, a truth that hung heavy in the air. The breaking point loomed as Joy, her voice now a mix of desperation and defiance, made a fatal misstep, telling Pedro to stick to playing superheroes and leave the real talk to people who actually understood the struggles of everyday Americans, her words dripping with condescension that drew a collective gasp from the crowd. Pedro's face hardened, his eyes narrowing to slits, and he took a step closer, prompting two security guards to inch forward, their hands poised but hesitant. As he remained calm, his voice cutting like a blade through the tension, he dismantled her argument with surgical precision, pointing out that her decades-long career, her wealth, her influence, hardly made her the voice of the working class she claimed to champion, a truth that landed like a punch, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience. He accused her of hiding behind her wit to mask a mean streak, a pattern he said was clear to anyone who watched The View closely, where she often dismissed opposing views as ignorant to score cheap laughs. Joy's composure cracked, her voice shrill as she demanded he leave her set, claiming she didn't need to tolerate arrogant actors disrespecting her in her own house, her words echoing through the silent studio as producers braced for what would happen next, knowing this moment was about to become the most explosive in The View's history. The studio of The View was a frozen battleground, the air heavy with the weight of a confrontation that had escalated into one of the most unforgettable moments in daytime television history. Pedro Pascal stood at the edge of the set, his dark eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and profound disappointment, his decision to confront Joy Behar's ambush hanging like a thunderclap over the stunned audience. Joy, her face a stormy mix of rage and regret, stood rigid behind the circular table, her earlier confidence shattered by the realization that she'd pushed too far, her sharp Brooklyn wit now a liability as her smirk faded into uncertainty. The co-hosts Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Ain, and Sunny Hostin sat in tense silence, their eyes darting between Pedro and Joy, their attempts to defuse the situation long abandoned. Producers in the control room were in a panic, their headsets buzzing with frantic orders as they braced for the fallout of a live TV catastrophe that had millions glued to their screens. Security guards hovered near the set, their presence a silent reminder of how close this clash had come to crossing an irreversible line. But Pedro remained calm, his posture steady, his resolve unshaken. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts below, because this is the moment where the truth of who won this battle comes into sharp focus, and the consequences will leave you speechless. Pedro took a slow, deliberate step toward the exit, his voice cutting through the silence with a quiet power that commanded the room. Addressing the audience one last time, his words measured but heavy with conviction, urging them to remember this moment, to see who had tried to foster an honest conversation about Fantastic Four's themes of unity, and who had chosen to weaponize drama for ratings. He spoke of his hope for better discourse, for entertainers to use their platforms to bridge divides rather than widen them, his Chilean accent lending a sincerity that resonated deeply, drawing scattered applause from the crowd, a sign that his message had struck a chord. Joy's face flushed crimson, her hands trembling as she tried to regain control, her voice shrill as she shouted after him, accusing him of running away, of dodging accountability, of disrespecting her show and her audience, but her words sounded hollow, lacking the fire they'd had earlier, more desperate than defiant. Pedro paused at the edge of the set, turning back one final time, his eyes locking onto hers, his voice low and cutting, saying that she'd proven his point, that her need to attack, to humiliate, to win at all costs, was exactly what was wrong with today's media, a truth that hung in the air like a verdict, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience, who were now fully invested in the drama unfolding before them. Joy stood frozen, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the studio as if searching for support, but the silence from the crowd and the nervous glances from her co-hosts told her she'd lost more than just the argument. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment her composure crumbled, her usual wit replaced by a mix of fury and humiliation, as she realized she'd handed Pedro a victory that would echo far beyond the studio walls. Whoopi finally spoke, her voice strained, suggesting they take a commercial break, but Joy waved her off, her voice cracking as she insisted on finishing the segment, though her words faltered, her confidence shaken. Pedro gave a final nod, a gesture of finality, before walking off the set, his head held high, his dignity intact, leaving behind a studio in stunned silence. The producers cut to commercial, their faces pale as they scrambled to pivot, but the damage was done, the confrontation seared into the minds of millions watching live. As Pedro disappeared through the exit, Joy sank back into her chair, her hands covering her face for a fleeting moment before she forced a smile, trying to salvage the show, but everyone knew there was no coming back from this. Social media erupted within minutes, clips of the clash spreading like wildfire, hashtags like #PedroVSJoy and #TheViewMeltdown trending, as fans and critics dissected every word, every gesture, every moment of the explosive exchange. News outlets ran headlines screaming, "Pedro Pascal storms off The View in shocking showdown," and Joy Behar's ambush backfires in epic clash, with commentators praising Pedro's grace under pressure, his ability to defend his principles without stooping to Joy's level, while criticizing Joy for turning a promotional interview into a personal vendetta, alienating even her loyal viewers. The internet buzzed with memes, reaction videos, and think pieces, with one viral post declaring, "Pedro Pascal just schooled Joy Behar on dignity," a sentiment echoed across platforms. Joy's team issued a vague statement about passionate debates and misunderstandings, But it did little to quell the backlash as viewers questioned her authenticity, her credibility shaken by her own actions. Pedro, meanwhile, remained silent, letting his exit speak for itself, a move that amplified his victory as fans rallied around him, praising his integrity and his refusal to be baited into Joy's circus. The confrontation was over, but its impact would ripple for years, a defining moment that exposed the cost of turning discourse into a spectacle, a lesson in the power of authenticity over manufactured drama. Pedro had come to promote Fantastic Four, but left as the victor in a battle of principles, his reputation not just intact but elevated, as he showed the world what it meant to stand up for respect and honesty. Joy, on the other hand, lost something irreplaceable that day, the trust of her audience, her sharp-witted persona tainted by a moment of hubris that would haunt her career. Every time this clash is revisited, in viral clips or heated debates, people will remember who fought for a real conversation and who chose to play the villain, who walked away with grace and who was left standing in the wreckage of their own making. A legacy that will outlast the applause and define their places in the public eye forever.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.